Hey everyone, welcome into the July 2023 edition of Caregiver Conversations by Carallel. I'm Matt Perrin, back with you, Director of Caregiver Engagement here at Carallel. Really excited about today's topic. It's one we haven't touched on before in this series. We're talking all about adaptive clothing today, something I wish I knew more about when I was in the midst of my caregiving experience. So to do that, we have some expert guests that I'm really excited to introduce. We have Andrea Wurster. Hey, Andrea, how are you?
Hello. Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you, thanks for being here. Andrea is Vice President of Product and Partnerships at Silvert's Adaptive Clothing. And Silvert's has been providing adaptive apparel since 1930. So that's kind of hard for me to get my arms around, but welcome and thanks for being here, Andrea. And then we have Ron Beleno here. Hey, Ron, how are you?
I'm well. Nice to meet you there, Matt.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for being here. Ron is a sort of part of the Silvert's team, but he's also, based on his own personal caregiving experience, he's turned helping other caregivers into his life's work. He's a renowned caregiving expert, caregiving coach in Canada. So really, really pleased to have Ron here with us. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Before we get into it, and we have 30 minutes for these sessions, 27 actually by the clock now, and so they're rapid fire, but I do have some housekeeping. First and foremost, if you're new to these sessions, attending one for the first time, thank you for being here. Glad you're here. And just a quick tidbit on Carallel. Our mission is to make caregiving easier, plain and simple. And we do that with personalized one-on-one support from our care advocate team, who are there to support, assist, and guide you through any caregiving challenge you have on your plate, whenever they're on your plate. And then we complement that human support with our digital platform, My Care Desk by Carallel, which is a one-stop caregiving shop where you can read helpful information and watch helpful videos, store important documents securely, communicate with friends and family, leverage practical tools to make, again, caregiving easier. So in a nutshell, that's Carallel, and we make our service available throughout the US through health insurance plans and employers. So if you're not sure if you have access to Carallel, ask your employer or ask your health insurance plan. Okay, that's a mouthful. That's Carallel. Second piece, these are conversations by design. So if you've been to one before, I sound like a broken record. I'm sorry about that, but it's true. So we want to hear from you throughout the discussion. If you have comments, questions, perspectives to share, please do drop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the balance of the session. And we'll do our best to address whatever we see in there. If we don't get to something, we'll follow up after and do it after the fact. So, all right, that's a lot of talking from me, Ron and Andrea. That's all the housekeeping. So now it's time to get into it, okay? On these sessions, as we've talked about preparing for today, we're really focused on the practical, right? So what does that mean about when it comes to adaptive clothing? I'm interested in learning really what it is, right? How it can improve the quality of life of a caregiver or a care recipient, where we can find it, what to look out for. And because you're representing Silvert's here today and you're experts in the space, I'd love to hear a little bit about some of your favorite pieces.
Awesome.
How's that sound?
Perfect.
All right, so I'm going to toss this. It's an all-play sort of question, but what is? Can you tell me what is adaptive clothing? Tell us a little bit about it.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to kick off here. So adaptive clothing is designed with features and functionalities that help people get dressed, whether they're getting dressed by themselves or have help from a caregiver or a loved one. So here at Silvert's, we define adaptive twofold. So in two ways. We have assisted styles and we have self-dressing styles. So to start with assisted, our assisted dressing styles are designed for folks who need help getting dressed. So this includes our no-peak open back nightgown, which I have here, as well as our tops. So this style specifically, the caregiver can just help their loved one or care recipient get dressed by putting it up the arms and around the back. So of course I'm wearing my shawl right now. It doesn't fit me so well, but super easy to get on. Within this category, we also have our open back pants that can be donned and doffed while the care recipient is in a seated or lying position. And then our self-clothing is designed for folks who are still dressing themselves with the help of our functionality and features. So for example, here's one of my favorites, our magnetic button-up top. We also have magnetic flies, as well as easy grip on our pants for easy pull-up. Yeah, so overall, adaptive solutions make these small differences every day, which in the aggregate makes a large impact in the lives of caregivers and their care recipients.
All right, lot to digest there, but my head is spinning. Well, first, before I interject, Ron, did you have anything to add to
Yeah.
what's your take from a caregiver's perspective on adaptive clothing?
So for me, when it comes to adaptive clothing, it's actually a simpler way to support the activities of daily living for my father, who had Alzheimer's back then, when he was still alive, and support him with his dignity, with his quality of life, just with these routines that happen every day, 2, 3, 4 times a day, depending, and it is one of those that I don't even look at the word adaptive clothing for me. It's just, does this clothing make my life simpler and make it easier for my dad with the challenges that we're going through as it actually progresses? So for those that are listening in, dementia and Alzheimer's is one of the more challenging ones. And there comes a point where it's not just simply memory, it's actually the ability to actually physically dress yourself. So that's what I'm looking for in solutions, and adaptive clothing does that for me there.
Yeah, Ron, you just kind of squarely hit sort of something that I was thinking about as Andrea was talking, and so when I think about how something like adaptive clothing can improve quality of life, just in general, you hit on the 3 things that I was thinking at, and the third is the one I want to lead into. So clearly, something that has magnets instead of buttons would have made it easier for my mom. I wish I knew about that. Like, just there's the functional aspect of this, right? Making it easier if when we were in a situation when I was having to dress my mom, making it easier to do that. When we were in a period of time where she was still dressing herself and was reluctant to accept my help because she wanted to preserve her sense of self, and like she had the pride in that. It would have made it easier. But then I'm also thinking about, flashing through my head as you were talking, was the same pair of loose-fitting black sweatpants that my mom, we had probably 4 different pair of them. I couldn't find them in any colors. I was trying to get other colors just to have some variety for my mom, but I couldn't find they were black. And then the same pair of shoes that they were broken down, sort of slip-in Merrill shoes with the heels sort of pounded down, that made it easy for my mom, for me to get my mom's feet in. And I remember thinking in that time, like, wow, I just can't believe she's having to wear this again, right? And the same loose-fitting cotton T-shirt. So the dignity aspect is part that I'm gravitating to, as you both are talking, because I find it hard to believe that mom having some, a top on, for instance, that was of course easier to get on, whether I'm doing it for her or we're doing it together or she's doing it on her own. But a top that had a little pizzazz, something that was more like her, right?
Yeah, so I want Andrea to talk about this in a moment here, because there's that functional piece of just getting it on, right? So there's that idea of, how painful. So my favorite one is this vest, right? Which has the magnets, right? It's just simply magnetic. Actually, not wearing it, but it does get in the camera here. It's magnetic here. You could trust me on that there. And then it's reversible, right? So that is very simple instead of fiddling. So that dignity of the struggling there. And then the fashion piece, right? It's not just this. There is a style. Up in Canada, we like this kind of plaid. So, and I think Andrea, I'll pass it to you, because I know you have a great fashion sense.
Yeah.
And
Wait, I don't want to give away all the favorite pieces yet. I don't want to give away all the favorite pieces yet. So Ron, you just skipped ahead, which is fine. And I love seeing the magnet and the vest. So we had, as you're showing that vest, Ron, for my father-in-law who was living with Lewy body dementia, we had the same fleece. It's off camera, but it's hanging just to my left. That was my fleece that was too big for him. It was oversized. it was more like a blanket for my father-in-law, Steve, which again, it did the job, but it wasn't necessarily him, right? So there's that aspect. Andrea, I had a question on sort of the functional aspect of this. And something you were talking about, first of all, you were using the words don and doff, which you know, don is to put on, doff is to take off. I just want to make sure I have that straight. Yeah. But something that caught my ear, ease of putting something on while someone's in a seated position, i.e. a wheelchair, or a laying position. Functionality wise, not necessarily about that piece itself behind you, but can you talk a little bit about what makes it possible, or what makes it easier to put something on our loved one while they're seated or laying down?
Yeah, Matt. So very simply, it's just the design of the garment. So thinking of being able to dress someone, like you said, almost like in something that's oversized. It simply just slips on and fits over. That's how our shirts, tops, and pants open back are designed to do so, right? So say if my Oma also had Lewy body dementia, and so near the end of her care journey, we were able to kind of dress her when she was still in her wheelchair or still in her bed, simply because we could slide up the garments, just because they're made that way.
I see. Okay. Makes sense. I guess, what else should the audience know? What else should I know about the function? Because what I picked up there, Andrea, was that what makes a piece of adaptive apparel or footwear, which we'll talk about in a second, adaptive, is that it's designed with that in mind, right? It's designed with the challenge in mind. Is it fair to say? Is that accurate? Right?
That's right. It's designed with the challenge of dressing in mind when we have to dress someone. So over to our quality of life question. We kind of frame this 3 ways. Adaptive can improve quality of life as it limits risk to both the caregiver and the care recipient when they're being or getting dressed, right? No need to lift, shift, twist, much better on both parties. 2, saves time. We've already been discussing that. And lastly, the arguably most important is that stress-free dressing and our loved one looks good and feels good. Now, Matt, I just wanted to pick up on something else that you mentioned about our footwear too. So when someone is able to wear something that makes them feel good and is safe, it's almost like they feel like themselves again, right? When they're able to wear colors and clothes that make them happy, I think it makes a huge difference in their lives.
Yeah, I agree.
Matt, if I can add just on the function piece, I like to challenge. I always like to challenge everybody to say, do the steps and be conscious of the steps when you get dressed the next time, or when you're taking clothes off. The body parts of how many things are moving just to put on a shirt, you know, to go from the right side or to the left side. What goes, you know, in the head, you know, what do you take off first? Okay. You know, all that stuff is a challenge even just for us. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say, hey, try and dress up within the first 1 minute when you wake up, and you'll see how easy or not easy that is, right?
Yeah.
Add to this that try doing it when you're sitting down. How do you put pants on when you're sitting down? What are you wiggling? There's a lot of challenges, and when people really pay attention to that, you'll see how many steps it takes, and that because of so many steps, there are so many failure points in dressing. And at those failure points is when the person that we're caring for, the care recipient or the caregiver, can break down, right? That's where adaptive clothing comes in.
Yeah, and you know, there's so that makes sense, Ron, and I like the way you frame it, the way you frame that, Ron, but also the way Andrea frames the sort of 3 dimensions in terms of that she was saying a minute ago around limiting risk, etc. But there was, for me, and this is, you know, I'm not projecting my experience and how I experienced the job of helping my mom or my father-in-law, but this was a real, looking back, this was a real point of challenge for me. It was sad. It was frustrating at times, right? Like it just it was almost, you know, at a certain point with my mom, there's this daily sort of headbutting around getting dressed, and but more than that, it was sad because you know, as I was mentioning before, you know, my mom was reduced, this wonderful woman. My mom's, I still saw her that way, right? And I fought so hard for the world to see her that way instead of seeing her as just some host for dementia. But here I was looking at her closet, and there are those 4 pair of the same black sweatpants. And then under her bed, she had a bin full of shoes that they were just her, right? She had always worn, and we only used that pair of Merrells, right? So there was and I guess, you know, I'm talking about the caregiver side of this equation here, but that part was really challenging for me. And I don't think you know, looking back now, I don't think I gave it a lot of, I paid it a lot of mind. I just sort of powered through it. So it's really interesting to me to hear that there are just this whole world of other options available, right? So anyway, that's just, I'll get off my
Just to add to
soapbox.
that, there, Matt, as caregivers, when you do become a caregiver, many times the battles of having choices, okay,
Right.
or limited choices, is something that is a struggle many times. And
Yeah.
that ability to have more choice, especially on an activity that is done again every day, okay. And I always remind people as well is that dressing is also that transitional activity, okay. Or
Yeah.
we always struggle when it's that, you know, when you're transitioning from sitting up to standing up, from getting into the shower, from going to the table to eat, okay. You're not going to be there forever. You eventually get to the table, you eventually get your clothes on, and you can enjoy that. But that whole process of transitioning to that comfort space is a
Yeah.
struggle. And if you only have limited choices of how to do it and what you can wear, yeah. So that's why
Yeah.
I really believe adaptive clothing, again, the fashion side, it's not that hospital gown anymore kind of
Yeah.
mentality that people think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's changing there.
Is it, oh, go ahead, Andrea.
I was just going to add, Matt, thanks for sharing that with us. You know, you're not alone in that experience, and we hear that all the time. And you know, that's our entire purpose of why, right, is to make the lives better and easier. And you know, at Silverts, we try to provide many colorways, many different fabrications as well, because style never ends.
Yeah.
That feeling of wanting to look good, and you hit on it yourself with it's about us too, like the family, right? Seeing our loved one looking good and feeling good, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, I agree, and really have nothing to add other than it was, you know, there was my side of that equation, but then there was, and this was always a great unknown. There was my mom's side, you know, because she lost the ability to communicate with words. So I was sort of left to guess and just assume, like, you know, so there was just, it just over time sort of exacerbated. But I see a question. So where can we find adaptive clothing? This is a question from the audience. So obviously Silverts is silverts.com, right? Is your website?
That's right.
And you know, we're a equal opportunity caregiver support organization here. So you know, I'd imagine there are other places people can find adaptive clothing as well, aside from Silverts. Are the big box retailers carrying adaptive clothing?
They're starting to. So we actually have some of our wheelchair blankets in Walgreens in the US,
Okay.
and a couple other stores as well. We're also on Amazon. Now, just of course, you mentioned, Matt, in addition to Silverts, there are many other brands we're doing adaptive, and that's right.
Yeah.
Search adaptive in Google, explore for yourselves. We're just trying to get the word out of the category.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and it's one of the things I love about your team is the fact that you, when it comes to adaptive, I mean, obviously you're a brand, you're trying to grow your brand, totally understand, but I just absolutely love the sort of rising tide lifts all boats sort of approach that you take organizationally to adaptive at large. So from this former caregiver, thank you for that. I guess another question related to the question from the audience. Is it more expensive than regular clothing?
So, in nature, yes, because there is additional fabrication. Right, we have the extra layer of fabric in the back. Now we've been able to merchandise our product in a way where we're incredibly tight and smart with how we produce. So we do our best to give our customers the fairest price point in the market, especially with our diabetic footwear and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So in short, yes, but no.
Yeah, and that was more of a question that, about the space at large and less directly about silvers, because I'd imagine it is, it could be a little bit more expensive just based on the sort of form and function. So that I would understand.
Matt, I want people to look at it in another way. You know, when it comes to price point, I look at it as investments. Okay,
Right.
That when it comes to caregiving, I do a lot of presentations on technology and tools. Okay, I always say, look at it as an investment down the road versus purely just as an expense. Okay, with 3 quality adaptive clothing shoes, be better than kind of just scrambling around for whatever.
Yeah.
And so an example is I would have with my dad, what you're saying with your mom as an example, is that I would have 3 different shoes and Dad, pick a color today, whether he was communicating or not, and he had a choice. Which shirt? So I'd give him 3 choices.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So he also had choice,
Yep.
but then it was an investment that I knew had quality, that's something that could make it easier for our lives moving forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate the transparency from both of you there, just because, again, as I mentioned at the top, our focus in these conversations is about the practical, right? So that's part informing and hopefully making people aware of something that maybe they weren't aware of prior, but it's also trying to provide, you know, as much visibility or holistic visibility into whatever the topic is that we're talking about. So, and I love the way you frame that, Ron, as an investment. You know, if I think about just the adaptive equipment, right? Like some I could get from a lending closet, other things I couldn't, right? And we had to, you know, figure out a way to procure. In some cases, that was paying out of pocket. So,
Matt, even before we chatted here, there's one thing I wanted to, that I think is important, that sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? And we don't know we're having a challenge. So as they're looking up adaptive clothing, whether it's on Silverts or elsewhere, is just actually browse just to see what does this actually do, because many don't realize, oh my gosh, that actually solves a problem that I didn't even know I had, but I have this problem. This will make my life so much easier.
Yeah.
So that's another approach going into it, that people say, I didn't know there was this thing that could do this, or make it easier. So yeah.
So that's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you about next. And I'm watching the clock, and I want to finish with a couple of your favorite pieces. But what to look out for, and I would imagine that it's starting with our person, right? So like, what are the challenges that our person has, and working backwards from there to find the apparel or the footwear that could help, right? Is that the right way to look at it if I'm shopping for adaptive clothing?
I think so, yeah. You know, that's a great question. So first of all, we do have a shop by need category where you can shop by, say, I'm a wheelchair user, look at wheelchair specific clothing, Alzheimer's, dementia, and so on and so forth. And then we also, so in addition to that, what I would look out for is like trouble getting dressed, or not wanting to get dressed, or almost like an aversion to it. Maybe it feels a little bit overwhelming. Ron, I'm curious to hear what you have to say here.
Yeah, so many times I begin with the end in mind and then reverse engineer what the problem is. So it's kind of saying, we're having this issue with you know, my dad, you know, being on the toilet. And so the one that I didn't get to try with him, but this came out, I think, more recently, was kind of like this. Andrew, what's this called? Yeah,
those are adaptive underpants. So they've opened.
Right? Yeah. So it's the underpants, but then this was one of my pain points, that, you know, how could I easily take it off? Well, this one, I said, okay, that wasn't there when I needed it. I didn't, right? So I start with more of the challenge, and then try and find what's out there to solve for that.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, just different words, but thinking yeah, what that barrier, thinking about the barrier and sort of orienting our search from there.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, one example, like there was a period of time right before my mom was unable to dress herself, like she was really fighting it, and my mom loved to wear blouses. I've mentioned that on previous sessions here before. And when I called them a shirt, she would get very annoyed with me. She would tell me it was a blouse, but she had a really hard time with the buttons. So something like magnets instead of buttons would have been a game changer for us. Okay, we have 3 minutes. What can you give us a take on what some of your favorite items are? I'm really curious.
Sure.
Andrea?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I'm a big shoe girl, and Silverts has been known for our wide and adjustable comfort slippers. So I have our new Sherpa design here. And then a few years ago, so our footwear team of experts designed a whole new line of footwear, so to accompany our slippers. I'm super passionate about this. Right, as we can see, fashion forward, a great color, but also really safe and easy to get into.
Okay.
And second, if I may, my silver shawl. This is my favorite product, probably of all time. Super cozy and warm. I'm always freezing in the office. So that's me. Thanks, Matt.
I love it. I love it. And
And
that
for me, you
shawl
already,
would have worked. That shawl would have worked well for my mom.
uh,
Yeah.
Um,
and for me, Matt, it's you saw, but
oh,
it's not.
you gave
Yeah,
it away, Ron, already.
so not just the vest, but anything. Exactly what you said. It's that whoever created that bottom part of the zipper is evil. Okay, whoever that person was. Okay, where you have to clip it in. But yeah, even though we say magnetic, Silverts has this kind of zipper magnetic one, which is really cool. So that's what I'm more interested in. Is my uncle has one where he could put it off and on easily. That's the stuff I love. Those things.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, this was super informative. I learned something. As I said at the top, I wish I knew more about this space a couple of years ago when I was still in the midst of my caregiving. But are there any final sort of thoughts you have for the audience, Andrea and Ron?
Mhm.
I think it's important for caregivers to find solutions that work for them and their loved ones every day, and also share those little tidbits, connect with others. It can be lonely, but again, caregivers, you're not alone. Let's band together, and resources exist. We're here for you.
Yeah, got it. All right. And what about you, Ron?
A very simple one is I always ask caregivers to look at their pain points that they could easily remove if they can. Okay, so find those things, those moments
Yeah,
in your daily routine. Dressing is a big one, and say, is there something better? No, is
yeah,
there something better I can invest in and make my life easier?
yeah.
And yeah, so that's what I keep saying. Always be paying attention to your pain points.
Yeah, I like that. Easier said than done sometimes,
Yeah.
but that very much aligns to something we talk about in our work with caregivers. But this notion of barriers and buffers. Barriers are the things that are tough, and the buffers are things that are working well. So,
Mhm.
lastly, there's a question about the name of your company. So again, that is Silverts, Silverts, and that's also in the invite to this. But if there are questions on that, just reply to your registration email. I'll be sure to get those answered. Time flies when we're having fun, but thank you guys. Audience, thanks for being here. Our next session will be August 24th. We'll be talking about the financial impact of caregiving and what we can do about it. So that's August 24th at noon Eastern. Ron, Andrea, thank you so much. Audience, thanks for being here. We'll talk to you soon.